I am the author of the searing memoir, My Islam, How Fundamentalism Stole My Mind and Doubt Freed My Soul. And as you may have noticed on the cover of the book, the A in Islam is instead an at symbol, which is really symbolic of the change that's going on. Thanks to the internet, thanks to digital media, free flow of information, free access to information, free speech online, which, as I would argue shortly, I think ultimately has a positive effect, despite the negative things we hear about ISIS, Boko Haram, using the internet to spread their heinous propaganda, their heinous footage, and to recruit people online. I do think that the influence is ultimately positive, hence the at symbol, which is rebellious, which on the cover of the book is graffiti sprayed on a wall defiantly, taking the A and chucking it out, doing away with rigidity and instead trying to find fluidity and substance and spirituality within a structure that has become calcified over time for many different reasons. So I am the author of that book. In the book, I tell the story of how the internet opened my eyes and heart to a world beyond the conspiracy theories and religious dogmatism of my upbringing. I tell the story of how the internet helped me discover that the Islam I grew up knowing in northern Sudan and in Qatar as a youngster was a politicized, authoritarian Islam mired by lies, deception, meant to control and subjugate. I tell the story of how the internet rewired the consciousness of a new generation of young Arabs and young Muslims and gave us a voice. How the internet not just rewired our consciousness, but actually gave us a voice, a powerful voice, and how that collective voice eventually played an instrumental role in leading and facilitating the Arab Spring. The same Arab Spring, which, as you well know, politically failed to deliver in a really catastrophic way in some countries, with the exception of Tunisia, which continues to progress and continues to move forward despite many, many obstacles. The same Arab Spring, which today I want to argue is not completely dead. Yes, it is politically dead. Yes, it failed to deliver politically, with the exception of Tunisia. But other factors that gave birth to the Arab Spring continue. They're still here, and in fact, they're still growing and growing by the day. What I am here to elaborate on, however, is the fact that the internet can be, and indeed is, a force for liberation for many young Muslims, like it has been for me. Growing up in a closed society like Northern Sudan and Qatar, you have to understand something. These countries, until these days, are dictatorships. And because they're dictatorships, by virtue of being dictatorships and having a ministry of religious affairs, something you don't have in the United States because it's a secular country, ruled by a secular government, at least most of the time, right? Because you don't have that here, however, there we do have it. We have a ministry of religious affairs. And because such a ministry is attached to a dictatorship, do you think a ministry like that is going to promote interpretations of Islam that promote free thinking, that promote pluralism, that promote individuality? Of course not. They're going to promote interpretations of Islam that are about conformity, obedience, intolerance, rigidity. And that makes its way all across the education systems and all across state-controlled television. Thankfully, there are other popular forms of Islam that are sort of bottom-up. There are families that can guide their kids to a more moderate path. And lucky for me, even though I was in that environment, when I got online in 2006, I could have been swept into the wrong direction. There were jihadist forums back then. There was very nasty extremist literature on the internet back then. But extremist literature by itself doesn't do anything. As an individual, you have to have pains and wounds and grievances that make you inclined to consuming a certain kind of literature. Thank goodness for me, I had love from my parents. And even though I felt lost in the world, caught between East and West, by the time I was in Malaysia, in a British international school, caught between tradition and modernity, despite those struggles, I had positive influences in my life, and thank goodness, what I discovered first was not the jihadist forms, but instead I discovered the liberal Arab blogosphere in 2006. These guys had been blogging since 2004, and they inspired me to join. In 2006, I began my blog, The Sudanese Thinker, anonymously, with a pseudonym, calling myself Dreama, so that people wouldn't know who I am and not get to say what I want without any repercussions, because I was scared. And despite being scared and fearing the people out there, the governments, believe it or not, I was actually way more scared of the red lines that had been put into my mind by the education system and the religious authorities. Even though I was online and I could ask Google anything, dear Google, tell me more about the Prophet Muhammad. Dear Google, tell me more about the Quran or the Bible. No, Satan. I could doubt, I could question, but yet the red lines were put in my mind and I was scared a lot of the time. Sometimes I would type those inquiries and my hands would be sweating. That is the level of mental control that such an education system can create in people's minds. Thankfully though, with the liberal Arab blogosphere, I was exposed to so many blogs that talked about a lot of taboos, things that I was told not to question growing up in school, teachers caning you by religious authorities, right, who worked in concersion with the governments and sometimes outside the governments, but still had a very authoritarian interpretation. And that was my idea of Islam. In 2007, for the first time in my life, I read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 2007. That's not long ago. I laugh about it right now. I can smile about it up here. But trust me, I was not smiling back then. In fact, after I had read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the first time in 2007, I was angry. I was outraged. I was livid. Because for the first time, I understood something profound, that I had rights, and these rights were mine, but they were systematically stolen away from me in the worst kind of thievery. And the worst kind of thievery being the kind of theft that you don't even know happened. See, at least if I knew if something was stolen, I could have done something about it, but I had no idea it was done. And I grew up with that. And when I started questioning the adults around me, they just sort of talked about human rights as if they're privileges, about liberalism and democracy and respect for minorities and free speech and equality as if they were privileges. Some people are privileged to have them in some countries, others are not. Well, that's just life. Well, I say no. I say that's BS. I'm just going to say BS. I'm not going to say the actual word. I got to respect this podium, right? But the blogosphere changed my mind. The blogosphere gave me confidence to express my voice. It gave me confidence in my own intellect. It made me break down the red lines that were programmed into me, and eventually I unshackled the dogmatism and I got away from it, and I was not the only one. This story is not only mine, I am one of many, and the larger point that I want to make before I conclude is this. The Arab Spring did not pop out of just anywhere, randomly. The blogosphere, the liberal Arab blogosphere existed since 2004, and that built up and built up and built up, and Twitter came into the picture, and Facebook came into the picture, and that finally exploded onto the actual real world. People were getting fed up of having freedom online, but no freedom offline. And the protests mobilized in ways bigger than we had ever imagined, and the digital activists played an instrumental role. The guys whom I was part of, the network that formed since 2004, was a crucial part in that. But then, of course, the Arab Spring failed. Or did it? Politically, it failed. The factors that give birth to it continue. Digital communication is spreading. Smartphones are spreading. Yes, you have nasty literature spreading as well. Yes, you have people who are becoming more dogmatic, and you have groups like ISIS. But the silver lining of groups like ISIS is that it's causing a lot of young Muslims to question religious authorities, to ask hard questions, so that they can internalize their own faith and find their own paths to freedom, in an indigenous way. And I think with the advent of online education, which is just starting in the Arab world, bottom-up innovation by digital entrepreneurs, many of whom I know, the fact that you have mobile payments on your phone and you have emerging nascent e-commerce, all of these things I think are going to have a very positive contribution. How they will play out, what kind of liberal institutions will emerge, I have no idea. It's a big prediction to make. I do not want to make it, but I think in some countries we're going to see some good things happening despite the catastrophes of today, and we have to acknowledge that. And so that's what I want to leave you away with. Thank you very much.